brave and in some ways bravest task is editing or finding a way out. This is where the breakthroughs happen, especially if you're brave enough not to follow a trail of pebbles back from where you came. And hopefully, when you leave the woods, you're holding a poem, an essay, a story, a play, a thing made of words and self and world, a map of your journey. What I also usually don't tell my students is that this is also what being alive requires, many times over. These brave wanderings. Aimee Lewis Reau, this evening's distinguished guest, knows this journey as a writer, as a woman, as a human being. I will never forget how, for Aimee as a CMU student, creative writing was not only a craft, literature was not only a subject, but for her, these were vital and deeply necessary tools for living and for survival. Reading Aimee's poems and her nonfiction reminded me how to be courageous and how, by engaging in the serious play of writing, not only are we journeying, but we are also inspiring others by our bravery. And that's the fourth task, I realize. Once you make your way into the open field again, helping others begin and endure their journeys. After graduation from CMU in 2011, holding a bachelor's degree in English and religion, Aimee set off for the world with this wandering, brave spirit, willing to enter, willing to get lost, willing to find a way out, and willing to help others. Aimee and I kept in touch from time to time by email, and I was always amazed and a little jealous about just how good of a wanderer she was, as it seemed her journey was always taking her new and interesting places. She received her MFA in creative nonfiction from Georgia College and State University, and later with her partner Laura Schmidt, another CMU alumna, she co-founded the Good Grief Network, a nonprofit organization that brings people together to metabolize heavy emotions in response to daunting planetary crises. Aimee and Laura's organization is itself like a shelter in the woods, providing a 10-step program, giving good, weary travelers tools to process their climate grief, to keep going. As poet Mary Oliver said, it is a serious thing just to be alive on this fresh morning in this broken world. Aimee and those at Good Grief Network know just how broken the world is, just how serious it is to be alive, and just how fresh the morning can be if we do the work of survival as individuals and as a global community. I am grateful for the work that they do. And here in the English department at CMU, we are so grateful that, at least virtually, she's with us this evening. Dear audience, it is my pleasure to introduce Aimee Lewis Reau.
Wow, thank you, Robert. I want to savor this moment. And you have no idea how well you just set up my talk. It's an absolute honor to be here tonight. To this day, I am moved by the level of care, attention, sensitivity to language, and straight up gritty authenticity that my CMU English professors modeled for me in and outside of their classrooms. My CMU English professors were an exceptional bunch. This talk is dedicated to those professors, many of whom are on this call, and to Ms. Lisa Eddy, who was my English teacher at Adrian High School. There might be some tears. An extra special thanks to both Robert Fanning and Jeffrey Bean, who supported me as a student and continue to support me today with my work for Good Grief Network. I crafted this talk with love and care after many hours of deep reflection and tears that came from thinking back on my days as a student at CMU. There's never enough time to express my gratitude and the lessons I learned as an English major, and we're here to celebrate you, so I'll be brief. Author, facilitator, and wondrously wise Michigan resident Adrienne Murray Brown taught me that our attention is currently our most valuable resource. Think about that. There's a lot of money being spent every day to capture your attention. I worked in advertising for a hot second, like a lot of English majors do to pay their bills, and I can assure you the amounts are mind-blowing. So this is a reminder just how much people pay to capture your attention for a moment. There's a lot of power hiding in that awareness. And with that being said, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for being on this call tonight and gifting me your attention while I deliver the talk of my dreams, a keynote speech to fellow English majors at my alma mater, Central Michigan University. I've written and rewritten this talk more times than I care to count. I feel a responsibility to be honest with you, as I'm 10 years past my graduation day when I was released into the world with starry eyes, a fiery heart, and a pen. It feels like I'm defying many odds by standing before you today, delivering this speech for a long list of reasons. To start, I've always had a fear of public speaking. My whole body used to shake when I gave speeches in that dreaded required speech class the university makes us take. And who am I kidding? My whole body still shakes every time I give a talk, and I am shaking now. I believe that what I have to share today is worthy of my shakiness and my discomfort. Because let's face it, life is not always comfortable. I can tell you that studying creative writing at CMU saved my life. In my third year, I was hospitalized 3 times for suicidal depression, just down the street from you in Alma. My whole world felt like it was crumbling. I had no ground beneath my feet. My story felt like it was over. I was stuck. After one of my hospitalizations, I was meeting with Robert Fanning to discuss my absence in his poetry course and how to make up missed classes, excuse me. I had 6 poems in my hand that I'd written in the psych unit after months of experiencing writer's block. In my despair, with shaking hands, I told Robert that I wasn't meant to be a poet. Heck, I probably shouldn't be an English major either, because I've always really struggled with grammar. It's awesome to have a book deal and have struggled with grammar. I couldn't quite get the poetic devices used by professional poets, and I felt insecure about that. Robert read each of my poems out loud and then paused. Sat in silence too long, and he asked, "Can I give you a hug?" After having been so isolated in the hospital and throughout my depression, the break in professionalism, the hug from a professor who had the sensitivity to ask, who cared about my words, and created a human connection, this moment of tenderness made me feel something. And if you've ever experienced depression, you know the weight of that darkness and the scary numbness that makes it hard to feel anything. Robert pierced through that with a moment of compassion and true caring. Robert, pointing to my poems, then said, "Aimee, these are the kind of poems that save lives." And he walked to his bookshelf, where he found and handed me his personal copy of Marie Howe's poetry book, What the Living Do. On the inside cover was a warm note to Robert from someone I'd never met, who clearly gifted him the book with love. He told me I could hold on to his copy for a while, and how Marie had been a teacher he adored at Sarah Lawrence. I took the book with me into my third and most challenging hospitalization yet. In the hospital, Marie Howe's poems brought something alive in me. I read her words and felt her grief, which miraculously felt a lot like my grief. We were connected through her words. She wrote about death, sex, and everything taboo, yet she did it with reverence. Her balance between sacred and profane freed something in me, and I started to think, maybe there was space for the ways I saw the world. Maybe there was room for my stories. Years later, while finishing my MFA degree, I sat by the Oconee River in Georgia, reading Howe's poetry collection, The Kingdom of Ordinary Time. I was stuck in my life again. I drank too much the night before, getting lost in the story that my voice didn't matter. When I read her poem, Before the Fire, out loud, with river sounds in my ear, and I heard the line, my soul drank enough to know how thirsty it was. And in that moment, despite my headache, I was off to the races writing, and I couldn't stop. I obsessively crafted a lyric essay with the care of a poem that I called Sunday at the River. And my thesis was complete with that essay, and it's still my favorite piece to read out loud. And the poetry gods must have been at work, because I dedicated the essay to Marie Howe, and somehow, on the same day I turned in my thesis, I happened to be at AWP in Minneapolis, where Marie Howe was giving a reading. I stuck around to give her a copy of my essay with a little note of gratitude for her work. She had an entourage of people around her, so I was nervous when it was my turn to talk. I said I was a student of Robert Fanning, and I'll never forget how she lit up. I told her I dedicated this essay to her, and she kissed me as I placed it in her hands. This is the power of our individual stories and the magic that happens when they overlap. Stories and connections save lives. We need stories to live. I think of these words brought to us by the beloved writer Barry Lopez often. Sometimes a person needs a story more than food to stay alive. Our stories shared in community make us even stronger. This is what the CMU English department offered me in a time of deep despair. This instance with Robert Fanning is only one story from a very long list that I have with many kind-hearted professors here. And it wasn't just the professors, it was my fellow students who also supported me and told me my stories mattered. The passion from our professors was contagious, and in many ways we lived it, shouting poetry in the parks and showing up for each other on the page. An openness to hear the stories of others, to bring people together in times of great distress. This is what I offer now to people all over the world as a facilitator of Good Grief Network. People come to me in deep despair and hopelessness over our collective troubles. If people are overwhelmed by social injustice or the climate crisis, we at the Good Grief Network create non-judgmental spaces where everyone can be heard and we don't rush to fix. We sit with them. We listen to their stories. I share some of my own stories. We take our armor off together and sit with the discomfort that comes from being a thinking, feeling person alive in these times. We connect at a heart level and see what emerges as we create space to share our authentic stories. Terry Tempest Williams, an activist and writer whose work I first read in Jeffrey Bean's nonfiction class, and who I never could have imagined would become my teacher at a remote location in Montana just 4 years later, taught me that bearing witness is not a passive act. When we listen to another person's stories without judging or rushing to fix, then we are bearing witness, and these stories change us. In a time when collective despair threatens to shut us down and disconnect us, the power of listening, of connecting, of bearing witness to each other's journey, each other's stories, it reminds us that we're not alone, that our story is not finished, even if we feel stuck. This is what helps us stay alive. Studying English for a number of years teaches us how to analyze stories and how to understand literary techniques. We practice close reading and discuss the human condition. We have everything we thought we knew about language challenged when we take a linguistics class, where I learned it's not just the story, it's the words chosen to tell the story, and that I must be gentle with the words others choose to tell their own stories, because the way we speak is deeply personal and connected to our identity and the communities we grew up in. In other words, our English classes teach us how to live, and that our story is connected to many other stories, and it never really ends. This is a moment in our lives where our stories overlap. If you meet me down the road someday, tell me you were here. This moment connects us. And as our stories overlap, I want to remind you that your entire life is a story being written with every breath. You are both the main character and the author of this story, which means it's entirely in your hands, whether you're the kind of character a caring reader naturally empathizes with and roots for. You will face moments in your story where you feel stuck, or you feel like the victim, or possibly even the villain. Maybe you're living the story, not living the story you had imagined. Living a good story, like writing a good story, requires a willingness to continuously craft, edit, and sometimes entirely rewrite as you go. Be willing to flow with the story asking to be lived through you. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, American poet, psychoanalyst, and post-trauma specialist, says, "I hope you will go out and let stories happen to you, and that you will work them. Water them with your blood and tears and your laughter till they bloom, till you yourself burst into bloom." So I ask you, what are the guiding stories in your life? How are you cultivating connection, especially in times of despair? And are you willing to edit or rewrite your own story to live a more meaningful story ripe with beauty at its core? Thank you for listening to my stories and for gifting me with your attention. Thank you for letting me celebrate you today. And congratulations. May you always allow your stories to bloom. Thank you.
Aimee, I understand that you and your wife have a book coming out in fall 2022. Would you tell us just really briefly what it's about, and maybe do you have a title already?
Yeah, the title's still in work, but it's going to
Okay.
use our 10-step program. We're calling it a stepwar. It uses our 10 steps and then uses memoir from my wife's and my individual stories, as well as our combined stories. And that'll be out in 2022. So please do watch for that. It's the book deal of my dreams.
Absolutely.
Through Shambhala Publications. Yes, that's important to say. Thank you. My
Shambhala
wife self came reminding me.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here and for listening to Aimee's testimonial. We would say, I guess if any of you who are from a religious background, we'd say it's almost like a witness testimony, and it's very powerful. And I want to thank you so much for coming today. Well, I'm Melinda Kreth. I'm the chair of the English department, and we are getting ready